Someone talks over you. You pause, smile, tell yourself, let it go. But silence wasn't grace. It was permission to be disrespected. Disrespect is a weed. Leave it once, it spreads. Leave it twice, it defines you. In power games, perception is blood. If they see you flinch, they don't see peace. They smell weakness. But what if silence wasn't surrender, but control? Stay, because what comes next might change how they see you and how you see yourself. Chapter 1. The Silent Wound. Tolerating disrespect as virtue. He doesn't shout, he doesn't argue. He believes silence proves strength, but the more he swallows, the less of him remains. The fool doesn't wear a sign, he wears habits, and the most dangerous habit is mistaking passivity for virtue. You were taught to be kind, to stay calm, to keep the peace. That being the bigger person meant letting things go. You believed kindness would earn you respect, but the world doesn't operate on intention, it reads impact. And the truth is harsh. When kindness isn't backed by boundaries, it disappears. When you say nothing, they don't think you're noble. They think you're nothing. You smile when the joke is at your expense. You nod when your ideas are ignored. You stay in rooms that shrink you, hoping they'll notice your value if you're just patient enough. But every time you bite your tongue, you teach them you're safe to overlook. You become a placeholder in your own life. Machiavelli warned us, the world doesn't care about your heart, it only fears your consequence. The moment you stop defending your dignity, the world stops acknowledging it. Silence, when misplaced, becomes self-erasure. If your presence carries no weight, your silence becomes their green light. Take Elijah, a thoughtful employee. He always volunteered for extra work, listened without interrupting, and laughed at every joke, even the ones that stung. He avoided tension, convinced that patience would earn him respect. But when promotion time came, he wasn't even mentioned. Others, with louder voices and clearer boundaries, were chosen. Decisions were made without him. People praised his niceness and stepped right over it. He didn't make waves, and that became his identity. The quiet guy who's always available, always agreeable, always there to pick up the slack. Until one Friday evening, he sat alone at his desk while others toasted their success. That's when it hit him. Not in anger, but in clarity. They weren't trying to hurt him. They simply responded to the pattern he created. He had taught them he was optional, replaceable, forgettable. And when he finally looked in the mirror, he didn't see a martyr. He saw someone who had been shrinking for years, confusing patience with power and silence with strategy. Maybe you've been Elijah. Maybe you thought being agreeable was enough, but something inside you, quiet and ancient, is starting to wake up. The part of you that's done being overlooked, that no longer wants to buy peace with your dignity, the part that no longer accepts a seat at the back of your own life. If this made you rethink your patterns, comment below. Not to be seen, but to signal you've started the climb. One line is enough, a single word. Because sometimes reclaiming your power starts with just showing yourself that you still have it. But recognizing the truth is only the first crack. What comes next is sharper: the panic, the backlash, the naked ego clawing to stay safe. That's Chapter 2, the exposed heart, where the need to be liked turns into a leash around your power. Miss it, and you'll spend your life apologizing for existing. Chapter 2, the exposed heart, clinging to approval. He thought staying calm was enough until one afternoon, someone made a casual remark in front of others, mocking his silence as weakness. Laughter followed. He smiled, but something inside cracked. He wasn't angry. He was exposed. And when you're exposed, the first instinct is to prove you still matter. That's how people lose themselves, trying to win back a dignity they never should have loaned out in the first place. So he did what most people do. He explained. He justified. He reminded them of his efforts, his intentions, his loyalty. He even made light of it, trying to seem good-humored, but every word, every laugh, every explanation didn't rebuild his dignity, it buried it. They didn't see his courage, they saw his need. And need smells like fear. When you explain yourself to someone who already dismissed you, you're not clarifying the truth, you're proving their power worked. Machiavelli understood. True power doesn't explain itself, it doesn't plead, it watches. Because the one who reacts first is rarely in control, and the one who explains too much becomes the easiest to dismiss. The world respects stillness more than sincerity, strategy over sentiment. Remember Elijah, the quiet achiever from chapter 1? He found himself in a meeting, challenged by someone less competent but louder. Instead of holding still, he jumped in, defensive, eager, emotional. He spoke too long, overshared, tried to reclaim ground through clarity. But the more he talked, the smaller he felt. The more reasonable he tried to sound, the less respect he earned. His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with too much need. He thought he was repairing his image, but what they saw was a man unraveling in real time. It wasn't just a bad moment. It was a mirror. For the first time, Elijah saw himself through their eyes. Anxious, desperate, too attached to their approval. Even when he made sense, he looked guilty. Even when he was right, he looked weak. And that silence he feared? It was his only weapon, one he gave away too soon. In his chase to be chosen, he became easy to reject. Elijah wasn't naive anymore. He'd tasted the cost of being too nice. But he still didn't know how to hold his power. He was no longer invisible, but now he was vulnerable. Bleeding approval from every word he spoke, his heart was exposed, and he didn't know how to shield it without disappearing again. Maybe you've been there, trying to win back respect by talking more, doing more, proving yourself in spaces that only tolerate your silence. But here's the truth. The moment you start proving your worth, you've already agreed it's in question. But if you think overreacting is dangerous, wait until you see what happens when comfort disguises itself as strength. In Chapter 3, The Weight of Doubt. If this message is cutting deeper than most, don't lose it to the algorithm. Subscribe. This isn't motivation. It's a strategy manual. Chapter 3, The Weight of Doubt. Questioning your worth. Not all prisons have bars. Some are made of comfort, repetition, and tiny rewards that feel like peace. Elijah told himself he was being patient, being wise, that the silence around him meant respect, that scrolling past discomfort was self-control, but it wasn't growth, it was sedation. Every time he ignored the tension, laughed at the joke, stayed quiet in the meeting, he thought he was choosing calm. In reality, he was surrendering in small doses. He thought comfort meant control, but it was just stillness wearing a mask. His life was running quietly and away from him. It wasn't just laziness, it was chemical. Dopamine doesn't ask you to grow, it asks you to feel better right now. Elijah delayed the tough conversations. He postponed decisions. He took on easy tasks to feel accomplished. He scrolled, replied late, avoided conflict. He wasn't weak, he was surviving. But slowly, that survival became his identity. And then it started slipping. He missed a deadline, but no one said anything. He stopped sharing in meetings, but no one asked why. He stayed in the background so long that the world forgot he was once in the front row. He thought disappearing would protect him. Instead, it erased him. He still told himself a story. They know my value. They'll come around. But deep down, that story was thinning. Then it happened. His team landed a new opportunity, a leadership role on a project he'd subtly campaigned for. He thought his consistency, his loyalty, his quiet grind would speak for him. But the announcement came without his name. They picked someone newer, louder, sharper, and worse. They asked Elijah to help onboard them. That night, he didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just sat, silent, still, staring at the ceiling, asking a question that had no words. Was this who I've become? Not sad, not angry, just unanchored, like a ghost in a life he built. He picked up his phone, stared at the screen, and scrolled. Out of habit, not hunger, there was no pain. Just a dull ache, a soft wrongness humming beneath his ribs, like waking from a dream you didn't know you were in. The next day, he laughed at a joke he didn't find funny, nodded through another meeting he wasn't needed in, answered emails like nothing happened. He wasn't hiding anymore. He had vanished, so gradually even he didn't notice the moment he stopped showing up. Burnout didn't arrive as a collapse. It came as a numbness, a thinning of the soul, a silence that didn't protect but swallowed. And yet, from the outside, it looked like control, like peace, like stability. But inside, he wasn't calm. He was stuck. This was the danger. He thought he was evolving, but he was evaporating. Elijah had once promised himself he'd never disappear again. But this was a softer kind of erasure, one with no alarms, no crash, just drift. Chapter 4. The Dawn of Clarity. Redefining kindness. Elijah once believed that being honest meant being safe, but something shifted. It was subtle, almost forgettable. A moment when he paused before speaking, unsure if his words would be used as connection or ammunition. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. He started measuring every sentence, every glance, every silence. Not because he wanted to manipulate, but because he realized not everyone deserved full access to him. He had shared too much, his doubts, his dreams, his pain, with people who didn't earn it. And they used it. Not always maliciously, sometimes through jokes, sometimes through silence, but each time something was taken. A little piece of mystery lost, a little edge dulled. He gave them the whole map to his psyche and was surprised when they knew exactly where to cut. He had confused vulnerability with strength, believed that openness would be met with understanding. But Machiavelli would disagree. True power, he now saw, doesn't live in exposure. It lives in the tension of what you don't reveal. Mystery isn't manipulation, it's defense. Because when people don't know your triggers, they can't pull them. Machiavelli would warn, once they know your fears, they no longer need to guess how to beat you. Elijah remembered moments where he'd shared something raw, only to feel it echo back days later in a tone meant to wound, not to connect. That wasn't love, that was leverage, and he handed it over willingly. He wasn't spiraling, just hesitating, caught between the desire to be seen and the instinct to be protected. And for the first time, that hesitation didn't feel like cowardice. It felt like wisdom. He thought being kind meant being understood, that if he was good, people would reciprocate. But now, he saw it. He had made himself legible, predictable, vulnerable without filter. And in that clarity came the quiet truth. He didn't need to be liked. He needed to be unreadable. That was the real lesson. You know someone who needs this. Share it, not to save them, but to remind them. No one escapes the game by being nice. Elijah was no longer naive, but not yet untouchable. That line between the two was mystery. He now moved with more silence, more space between questions and answers. He no longer filled every silence with explanation. He let the weight of his restraint speak for him. Knowing what to hide is power, but knowing who to trust with your truth, that's the next battlefield. The rise to control. Chapter 5. The rise to control, mastering non-reaction. Elijah was no longer ignored. People nodded when he spoke. Emails ended with compliments. Meetings passed without tension. At first, he thought this was growth. Finally, he was respected. Finally, they were listening. But the room had grown too quiet. No challenge, no pushback, only applause. And somewhere in that applause, something inside him began to dull. He had fought so long to be seen that when the approval came, he clung to it, not out of arrogance, but relief. And that relief turned into hunger. Praise started to feel like proof, a new kind of addiction, subtle, clean, flattering. But the more he leaned on it, the less he noticed where it came from. Smiles from people who never challenged him, compliments from those who feared confrontation. Their words didn't sharpen him, they softened him. And in their flattery, he stopped growing. Machiavelli didn't fear his enemies, he feared the allies who stayed silent. He warned the downfall of a ruler begins not with rebellion, but with the silence of those closest to him. The friend who only says what keeps them safe is not your strength. He's your liability. Truth doesn't have to be loud, but if it's absent, rot begins. Elijah started to notice the divide. There were those who always clapped, always smiled, always reposted his wins. They made him feel admired, but not alive. And then there were the few, the uncomfortable few, who asked harder questions, pushed back in private, made him pause before reacting. One group praised his image, the other sharpened his reality. He had to choose, and for the first time, he did. So now ask yourself, who around you can say you're wrong and you still listen? Who dares to challenge your certainty without losing your respect? If you can't name someone, then you're not being sharpened. You're being flattered. Look at your 5 closest voices. Are they expanding your mind or just echoing it? Elijah began to filter. Not everyone was allowed in anymore. Not every opinion earned weight. He wasn't just avoiding harm, he was curating influence. He stopped chasing validation, stopped mistaking applause for accuracy. Instead, he leaned into friction, into tension, into people who made him think instead of feel good. He wasn't protecting his peace, he was building his perimeter. This was no longer about surviving disrespect, it was about controlling what shapes him. He wasn't looking for agreement, he was looking for alignment. And alignment sometimes sounds like, that's not it. He had restructured the world around him. But the hardest voice, the most persuasive, most seductive, most dangerous, was still ahead, the one that lived in his own mind. And that's what comes next. What part hit you hardest so far? Comment it below, because clarity begins when you name what's been haunting you. Chapter 6. The Sovereign Self. Becoming undeniable. He looked the part, spoke the words, moved with certainty. But beneath the posture, Elijah wasn't powerful. He was afraid. Afraid of being overlooked. Afraid that without the performance, there would be nothing left. Most people never question the image they build, but Elijah began to see it for what it was. Armor made of cardboard. He once mimicked the powerful, memorizing their tone, their gestures, their confidence. But power isn't imitation, it's embodiment. Pretenders play a role. Strategists train in silence. Elijah stopped performing and started listening to the tension in a room, to the urge to speak and the strength it took not to. Power, he realized, isn't how loud you are. It's how quiet you can be without losing control. There were days Elijah disappeared. No posts, no explanations, no noise. In that solitude, he didn't wither, he sharpened. He denied distractions, endured his own restlessness, and studied himself like an enemy he needed to outmaneuver. He gave up the need to be understood, the need to be liked, the need to be seen. Because true presence isn't built by visibility, it's carved in silence. His final battle wasn't public, it wasn't dramatic. It happened in the stillness of a late night with no audience, when his pride told him to speak and he chose silence. When his ego screamed to react, and he didn't. Elijah didn't fight anyone else anymore. His war was with impulse, with insecurity, with the outdated version of himself. And then, the shift. Elijah saw it clearly. Power isn't something others give you. It's what you stop giving away. To fear, to insecurity, to the approval of the crowd. He wasn't here to prove anything anymore. He was here to embody something deeper. He didn't flinch at silence. He didn't explain his boundaries. And suddenly, people spoke to him differently. They paused, measured their words. Not because he demanded it, but because he had become someone who didn't need to. Elijah didn't chase clarity anymore. He had become it. No longer a seeker, now a signal. No longer noisy, now undeniable. Now it's your turn. Not to pretend, but to ascend. But don't mistake this as the end. Because how you carry that power, how you live after the climb will reveal everything. And that's what we face next in the final truth. If this feels like chapter 1 of your own transformation, follow us. We're building the unshakable mind, one decision, one boundary, one awakening at a time. You've walked through 6 truths, each one peeling back a lie the world never warned you about. Not just insights, but fractures. Not just clarity, but consequences. You didn't just learn something new. You lost the luxury of pretending you didn't know. You've seen why kindness without boundaries becomes self-erasure. Why silence, when placed right, draws gravity. Why the need to explain is a leak in your power. Why mystery earns more than exposure. Why the loudest person rarely holds the room. And why the real threat is the one who doesn't need to speak at all. This was never about changing others. It was about stopping the surrender you didn't realize you were offering. Now picture this. 30 days from now, you walk into a room, unapologetic, unreadable. You don't explain your presence, you are your presence. People pause before they speak, not because you demanded respect, because you've become someone who no longer needs to ask for it. If this woke something in you, subscribe and share it. Your transformation just started.